I'm grateful too. I want these stories to be told. I'm Susan Kidd, and I was born here in Idaho, in Blackfoot, Idaho, on November 8th, 1955. And I was born into a family that had 7 children. There were 3 older than me and 3 younger, so I was right in the middle. We kind of had a typical family. The boys would fight, we'd fight with each other, and then we had good times. And we lived on a farm, and we had a lot of things to do as children. Lots of places to play, and we spent a lot of time outdoors. Some of the fun things, our garage was not attached to the house, and we loved to play Annie I Over. And that's a game where you throw the ball over the garage, because it wasn't attached, we could run around it. And if the other side catches the ball, then they come chasing after you. And you don't know whether they caught it or not, so you're waiting on the other side of the garage to see if they come. And they come around either pretty quick, and you don't know which direction they're going to come, and you have to be ready to run. And you'd have to run to the other side before they tag you. And then they would throw the ball, and you'd yell, Annie I Over, and then throw the ball, and then you wait to see if they come running. Because if they miss it, then they stay, and then they throw the ball and say, Annie I Over. And that was so much fun. We played No Bears Are Out Tonight. The porch was the safe place, and we'd wait till it was dark, and the different people siblings would be hiding around the trees, around whatever they could find, rocks or whatever, and we would run around yelling, No bears are out tonight, hoping that they don't jump out and tag you, and you go out in the dark, and it's so scary. It was so fun, and we would play until it was super dark, and Mother would always come out, you kids get in, it's dark, it's time to quit, and we never, ever wanted to quit. We had so much fun. We had lots of fun areas to play, and we got into a lot of trouble on some of these areas we weren't supposed to be in. But there was in the back where my dad's shop was, there was a building that had 4 rooms in it. It was built just like a regular room, and it had 4 rooms. And they were separated with the walls almost to the top of the roof so that it could be filled with grain. And they would fill the different rooms and leave the one with the door empty. And there was a ladder so you could climb to the top where the grain was. Well, us kids, there was no light really, except the opening they put the grain through, and then they would close it once the grain was there. We would climb to the top of the full room that had all the grain in it, and then the other one that was right next to it would be either half full or less than that. And you would jump into the dark and land in this soft grain. And we did that over and over and over. And it was the funnest thing to have when my friends would come or other relatives, we would take them out there and have them climb up there on top of that grain and then just leap into the dark. And it scared them, but we knew there was grain and it was going to be safe, but we could only do that after, of course, the grain harvest. But, we played for hours. I know when we were playing sometimes back there where my dad's shop was, he'd get mad at us because he didn't want us back there and all this dangerous stuff, but you couldn't have kept us away. It was just way too fun. But then there were things we did that were a little more dangerous. Grandpa had a derrick, and it's a big, long, like a telephone pole on a tripod holding it up. And they used it, the tripod was like a third down, and you could take the end of it and move this great big pole through the air. And so we kids attached to the end of that a little swing seat that we could sit on. And then someone would get on the end of that and pull you. And so if you can imagine this long pole that goes way up into the sky, and then they would go like this and send you just flying. And of course you had to hang on really tight as they flung you into the air. But oh, that was fun. I think my parents or grandparents found out we were doing that because they took it down and we couldn't play on it anymore. But it was fun for a few years till they found out about it. So we had the good times, and then we also had those moments where you know, we fought and things. And I remember my older brothers, the Grand and John, fighting and fighting. And one day my mom said, okay, or Dad, okay, that's enough. Get outside and you can just fight yourselves as tired as you get outside, and lock the door behind them. And so they're out there fighting and fighting. And the door was locked so they couldn't get back in until they were done with their fighting. But my sister and I also had moments of not getting along. I remember we had to wash the dishes together, and oh my goodness, I think we ended up pulling hair more than we did washing dishes. We just fought. She was older than I was by about 5 years, and we even had a room together, a bedroom together. And she was probably older at this point because she couldn't stand this little sister of hers. And so she put a line down the bedroom like lots of kids do. And this is my side, this is your side. And I was not to even get close. Even the bed had a line down it. She slept on one side, I slept on the other side. And since she was older than me, she was bigger than me. And I remember the bed kind of went like this, and she didn't want me touching her. And so I remember hanging onto the side of the bed, and I'd fall asleep and start rolling, and I'd touch her, and I'd get a good whack, and I'd climb across the bed again and hang on, because I knew she'd get me if I touched her. And it was so hard to stay on my side of the bed with the bed just having this little bit heavier person versus me. And so we had those times, but there were lots and lots of good times. Animals were a big deal as we were growing up. My grandfather had sheep. We were herding sheep a lot. In fact, I got so tired of the phone ringing because there'd always be a neighbor or somebody, your animals are out, and that was the clue for us kids to go and herd them back. And so we'd have, I don't know, at least once a week, it felt like it was really often, out chasing these animals, trying to get them back. And sheep are hard to herd anyway. But there were times it was the horses that got out because we had horses. But that was quite common to have them out. But herding, we had a lot of sheep herding because in the spring, Grandpa had us take the sheep out to the desert. And then in the fall, we had to bring them back to the sheep sheds for lambing and things. And I just remember riding in the car with my grandparents and having to stop. Grandma would stop along the way, and we'd have to stand in front of somebody's house or somebody's field that had a gate open and try to keep the animals from getting in. So those were crazy. But horses were really important in my growing up years. Riding horses was like my favorite thing to do. And my grandfather gave me a horse when I was quite young, and I named it Merrylegs. I don't know if you've ever read the book Black Beauty, but that's the name of the little horse, the little one that was a friend to Black Beauty. But anyway, I don't remember, I didn't ride her very much because I was kind of young, but in my really young years, I remember Carolyn being on, my oldest sister, on the horse, and she put me in front, and then we'd go, and I would work myself up the neck of the horse, and pretty soon I was up by the ears, and I remember her grabbing me and pulling me back, so I must have been like 3, 4 years old, and she was constantly pulling me back because I'd work my way up the horse's neck. But yeah, the horses were an important part of my life. I loved going out and just going to friends' house. In fact, I took the horse one time. This is a horse that my grandfather gave me when I was much older, and it was a quarter horse, and I really loved that horse because it knew how to run, and it had personality. It had more than just an old nag kind of thing. He was strong and loved to prance. Anyway, I would take him to a lake, and I would take him out there, and he would swim, and I could feel him swimming underneath me, and I just thought that was the funnest thing ever, is to take him swimming. But as I got older, I worked for A&W in my high school years, And they gave me a paycheck, and I thought, to be funny, be clever, I was going to take my horse in to deposit the check. So I rode that horse all the way into Blackfoot, which is about a 15 mile, well, to go to the bank, it was probably 15 miles. And I got in there, and I took a bandana and put it on my face, and I went up to the window on my horse, and I said, here, I want to deposit a check, and everybody was laughing in the bank because I was on this horse to deposit a check. I just thought I was trying to be funny. But anyway, they got it. I don't know if today they'd get a good laugh out of that, but back then they did. They thought everybody came to the window to come see. It was kind of fun. Grandpa had a lot of horses, and I could go up and pick me out one. You know, we're talking about maybe, I don't know, 100 at the time. Lots of horses. Not all of them were broken. Only a few of them were. But they would go up there, and they'd come to me, and it was, you know, that was just my favorite thing to do, is just go up there. And I had names for most of them and that kind of thing. Well, I had gotten one of the horses. It was a younger horse. It was a Shetland horse. And I brought it down here. I put a halter on it. I think in my mind I was thinking, I'm going to do a little training on it. Well, I had tied it up, but being a kid, I probably didn't tie it very well, because the next morning it was gone. And instead of going and checking on it to find out, are you okay, I just assumed it went back with the rest of the horses and everything was fine. And so I didn't do a thing. So about 4 or 5 days later, my grandfather comes to the door, and he was pretty upset, actually really upset. And he set me aside and he said, what were you thinking? And I said, well, I just figured it would go back to the rest of the horses. Well, what had happened was the lead rope that it was tied with in the halter had caught on a fence or something. And the horse couldn't get to water. It couldn't get itself free, and it was stuck there. And I didn't realize it was pregnant, and so it not only nearly died, but it lost its colt. And he just saw that as such an irresponsible thing to do, which it was, to not follow up and check to see if everything was okay. But his disappointment in me hurt more than anything. And I was pretty ashamed of that, to think that I had done that without caring enough to just make sure everything was okay. I just took these animals for granted as a child, and I must have been a teenager then, as I wasn't little. I was probably about 15. And I should have known better, but I think there's a lot of things that in life that you have to grow up to understand. Certain things happen. Traumatic things can happen, and it takes you till you're adult to figure it out and put it in its place. And there were enough of those things in my life. We had some accidents that were very traumatic for me, and it took me a long time to come to grips with it all, if I think I've even reached that point. It's a horse story. I had a cousin come to visit, and I put him on this stronger quarter horse. His name was Kipper, and I should have known better, because he didn't know how to manage a horse. And I saw the horse. I knew, you know, by the way he was acting, that he wanted to head home back to the pasture. So he was coming around the house, and so I thought, well, I'll just catch him off and go around this side of the house and catch him as he was coming. And instead of doing that, he ran out onto the street, and there happened to be a semi-truck at the same moment, and it hit the horse, and my poor cousin went flying through the air, and he landed. I didn't see all of it, of course. I just saw parts of it, but his head hit the cab of the truck, and then I don't know if it hit the ground too, but he was really injured. His head was, I mean, it was a miracle. A good neighbor happened to be passing by. He stopped and gave him a blessing and commanded him to stay alive until he could get help. So he did, he stayed alive, but it was really hard for me to forgive myself. And I remember for weeks, I just was really, really depressed about it. And I can't deal very well with accidents, and so I couldn't have gone over there to help or anything. I just remember coming into the house and getting Mom and letting her know that there'd been this accident and they needed to call an ambulance. And so I didn't go to see how he looked or anything. I don't know if it's probably best I didn't, but yeah, years later I talked to my cousin David. I talked to him and said how sorry I was, and he told me he'd already forgiven me, but other members of his family didn't forgive me, and I didn't learn about that till later. Until much later, then it came out that, well, it was his mom, that she'd never forgiven me for that. And at that point, I was an adult, and I could just say, I'm sorry that you haven't, but I can't change it. So it was easier to deal with. If she'd said that to me when I was a child, it would have been, I don't know if I'd ever, it'd just take that much longer to get over it. I was a teenager. I was probably about 16, 17 years old. But one thing that happened during that time is I had an uncle. No, he wasn't an uncle. It was Mom's cousin that lived nearby. He stopped by, and I remember I was just really depressed. I just was so sad. And it was probably 2 weeks later. And he came out, and he just put his arm around me and talked to me for a while and kept telling me it was going to be okay, that I needed to let it go, that accidents happen. And, it was all kind. It didn't change me in the sense that I suddenly got over it, but his kindness kind of gave me strength to kind of let it go for a while. And I knew I had to, reach a point where I could let it go. And it took me years. It took me a long time to let it go. In hindsight, knowing that I knew what kind of horse that was, and you had to be a good rider to ride him. So the one thing I would have done different is think about who I had put other people on that horse, but not a child like that. And I just thought I could control the situation. And the truth was, I would have changed it by not putting him, a child, on that horse. Definitely. That's what I would have done different. But that horse, he survived. It only scraped him up. He didn't ever go down or anything. So he got the better end of that. But my grandfather sold him pretty quick after that. The good memories are happy and good, and the traumatic stuff has taken me a long time to process and to forgive myself and to move on. I think that's how you learn your lessons in life, is those mistakes you make, because you don't realize as a child the consequences. I met my first husband. I went to BYU in Provo, and he was in my family home evening group. They, the different apartments, rooms and stuff would meet with you were scheduled to be or put together with different groups. So he had 3 roommates, and 4 counting him. And so that's where I met him. I actually dated his roommates first, and it just didn't go very far. But it was him when he asked me out. Our first date was going to a concert. We found out we both loved a lot of the same music, classicals. So we went. I can't remember the lady's name now, but she was an opera singer and very classically trained, and we both just loved it, and that was our first date. We had some pretty crazy dates because he worked at the city dump, and so there would be times that we'd actually have our date at the city dump because he worked nights, and that was the time we'd go. And so kind of crazy to have a date at the city dump, but that we did that. And he was so creative. Our dates were always so crazy. He loved just doing off-the-wall stuff. He had a speaker that he hid inside his car. And so he would be driving down the road, and he'd speak into a microphone, and people wouldn't know where it was coming from, these different sounds or a voice or whatever. And he would just act like he was just driving. It wasn't, it wasn't me, oh, I wonder what that is, And it embarrassed me. I was like, why are you doing that? He just loved to get people's reactions. And so those were our crazy dates. We had very crazy dates. We finished school there at BYU, and then we moved. Ryan was born, and then we moved to Clear Lake, Iowa. And he was from Iowa, so we were moving near his family. And we had so much fun. He loved road trips. The family would take lots of road trips. It seemed like we would go someplace every few months. We would go to Wisconsin or Chicago, or lots of trips for the church history stuff. We would see Nauvoo, we'd go to Independence, we'd go, all these places. And we went several times. And it was really fun. I enjoyed the road trips. Another thing, we got bikes for all the kids, and we would always have the baby in the car seat, or the bike seat that's in the back. And he would always tell whoever's sitting behind him, the baby, that he couldn't go unless they pushed. They had to help. So they would push on his back, and he'd go a little faster because they were working and pushing. And what was so funny is just a few months ago, Rebecca was telling me that she, as a child, thought it was real, that it really made a difference, that he needed her help. And so they all felt like, well, we're helping Dad, we're going to help him by pushing on his back. And then look, he's going faster, he's doing, And not until much later did it dawn on her that that wasn't real at all, that she wasn't really helping. I thought that was so funny. We left Clear Lake after about 8 years and moved to a farming area and added on to a home that was there. And it was a great place. The kids had a wonderful time there because it was open space, lots of place for kids to play. We had a little canal, little stream, and they'd go down and catch crawdads or whatever. And they played outside a lot. A lot of space to run and play. We bought a horse. I decided I wanted a horse, and so we got a horse, and it was fine for me, but the children, it didn't seem to like children. I'd never met a horse before that really hated children. And I had to protect the children from him because he would either bite them or kick them. And sure enough, Scott came into the corral, and the horse just walked by him and took his foot like that and kicked him. And it was Christmas, I think 2 days before Christmas, or yeah. Anyway, come to find out, it broke Scott's leg. And it didn't take long. We had to get rid of the horse. But yeah, he had a cast on his leg for Christmas. It was pretty crazy. So instead of the horse, I bought a trampoline with the money we got for the horse. And that was a much safer, more kid-friendly thing to own. So that was fun. The kids had the trampoline. So the games that we would play, the kids, I think it was all of them, that they just loved to play together, pretty much like when I was growing up. But we played charades. Charades was kind of the favorite game of our family. And we all knew the signs to make and how to play it. And when Kathrine was a little one, and the rest of them all knew how to play really well, she stood up and she wanted to turn. And of course, hers were not as easy to understand because she was so much younger than the others. And what was so funny was she was going to do Star Trek. And she stood up and went to straighten her shirt. And of course, that looked like Captain Picard. He was always straightening his shirt. And I think it was Ryan said, Star Trek, and she started to cry. She hadn't even started yet. We already guessed hers. She was pretty upset that they already knew what she was going after, even though she hadn't started yet. But yeah, games, we played a lot of games. Scott was good at creating games, and so we did a lot of Scott-created games too. We had one, he called it the first word you thought of. And so we would just go around and a person would say something, they say sweater, and you had to think of something that was like that, clothing or something, but you had to say it really quickly. And so we would go around and it would switch. I mean, it would start as like a sweater with clothing, and all of a sudden it would become food or whatever, other things. And it was really, we had to quick think, and it was fun. We had a game where we rolled up a newspaper. This, I think, was our family's favorite. And everybody would pick, I'm just going to use this as an example, everybody would pick a color. And we all knew each other's colors. And so the person in the middle also had a color. And they had the rolled up newspaper, and they were going to swat you with it if you didn't, answer quickly enough. And so let's say a person would say blue, and that was my color, so they'd come after me. And before I got swatted, I could say yellow, and that would send the person to another person. And we just run around, and as soon as they say his color, the person that's standing in the middle, and they get swatted because you can't say the person in the middle's color. Or if they said their own color, or if they just couldn't think of something. So they would end up swapping. Well, the trick was the person that was used to be in the center that was going to sit, if they sat down before they said a color, you'd get swatted too. So we would always end up sitting, oops, I sat down, and you'd get swatted and you're back in the middle again. And it was so fun. We just played that a lot and enjoyed that. We had a canoe. We decided, Kermit said, well, let's take it out. It was early in the spring, and they had the water runoff from the spring. And we decided, other kids were all in school, so we took Kathrine, and we got into this canoe. And it was great for a while, because the water had overflowed the banks, and it was over in people's fields, and we were just canoeing all over the place. And it was all great fun until we started heading back, and we got onto the canal again, and the water now was not overflowing the banks, and it was swift. And luckily we had a life jacket on, Kathrine, but it was so swift that we couldn't manage the canoe. And we hit an area that had some trees leaning over across. Anyway, the canoe flipped. And yeah, it was pretty traumatic in the sense that it was super, super cold water because it was the spring, and it was super fast. I got caught in the tree that was across it, and Kermit came popping up on the other side. I had a hold of Kathrine, but she was under the water. I was holding her under the water because there was a tree there, and it was sweeping her under. And Kermit was saying to me, you got to let her go, you got to let her go. But I had to trust. He hadn't had to get a hold of her yet, but I had to trust that he was going to catch her as the swift water was going to wash her away. That was the hardest thing I ever had to do, was let her go in the water. But I knew I couldn't hold her under the water. So I let her go, and luckily Kermit caught her. And but I was caught. The rope from the canoe was wrapped around my legs. I couldn't move. I was trapped in the branches of the tree. And Kermit went to go get out and try to hold on to Kathrine, and the branches would go down as he tried to climb out of there. And so we were in the water quite a while trying to figure out how to get out. And finally, he said, I can't climb out with her, and I can't let go of her. You're going to have to get out. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'm getting this completely right because it's been enough years, but anyway, I think it was the other way around, because it was Kermit that went and found somebody. So I made my way, I think, to Kathrine, and he got out. And again, we couldn't put any weight on the tree because it would go down into the water. And so he went to a person's house, and he found a little girl that said she would come. And she climbed out on the tree, and that didn't cause it to go as far into the water. So we handed the baby over to her, and she made her way through the tree and out again. And then I could, kind of get myself untangled and climb out. Anyway, we get to the hospital, and they couldn't find her temperature. It had been, she'd been cold for so long that it didn't even register. And she was so lethargic. She just laid there like a rag doll. And it took hours for her to get warmed up before she started to, before she started to act like she was awake, you know. But she was awake the whole time, but she just had this blank look on her face. It was scary. It was so scary. And they tested her lungs, and they were so shocked to find that she hadn't swallowed any water. With all that holding under the water and stayed in the water and all that, she had never taken a drink of it. So that was amazing. I'm trying to think of how old she was. She's between 2 and 3, maybe. She was just little, just a little thing. Of course, there was a police report and all that, but are you good parents kind of thing, you know. But it was so scary. And I relived it for, I think, a whole year. Every time I fall asleep, now if I'd done this, or if I'd done that, or if, again, was that wise to go out on the water like that? And yeah, that was a pretty traumatic accident. But I just feel like the miracle was that there was this little girl. She had stayed home from school, and she was right there, and she could go out. And because I didn't know how we were going to because we were in the middle of this fast-flowing water in the canal, that, you know, we were caught there way in the middle, and so we had to work your way, and that was pretty scary. I'm glad we still have Kathrine. Talking about that water, we almost lost Rebecca to that water. One day, we lived about half an hour, 40 minutes from church, and Kermit was the clerk, and so we didn't have 2 cars to take to church. So after church, we sat around waiting for him to finish all the clerk stuff. And then it was the drive home. And so sometimes we got home really late. The kids were hungry. I'd take snacks and things, but you know, it just made for a really long day. So we had gotten home, and we were all sitting around, and I just felt exhausted just because it had been a long day. And I kept feeling the Spirit say, you need to go find Rebecca. And I remember thinking, okay, just a second, I'll do that, you know, because I just was wanting to sit for a while, you know. And again, you need to go find Rebecca. And I remember thinking, yeah, I'm going to. And then Ryan walked in, and he must have been about 15. And he said, Mom, we need to find Rebecca right now. Well, that right there shook me and got me thinking, oh, I need to find her right now. So we started looking. It never occurred to me that she was outside. We're looking all through the house. She's not there. Finally, we're like, well, okay, we got to go outside and start looking for her. And we lived where there was a canal on one side of us and a little kind of a stream ditch kind of thing on the other side. And we had an acre property. So we usually when we'd go for walks down the road through the countryside, we'd walk that way towards the little stream. So when we went, I thought, well, if she went for a walk, of course, we're walking around our property calling her name, and we can't find her. And she's about 5 or 6 years old. And we just I couldn't find her. Now I'm starting to get really worried. And so we walked this way, and I said, you know, you guys go that way. This is the way we always walk, but maybe she went the other direction. So I turned and went back that way. And I reached where the canal was, because there was a bunch of trees. This is Iowa, so there's trees everywhere. I get past the trees and near the canal, and there she was, climbing down. Again, it was a spring runoff, something about spring. And she's only a foot away from going into the water, which would sweep her away and we'd never find her. I took off running, calling her name, and she stopped, luckily. And yeah, she was about 5. And I caught her just before she literally decided to step into that water, which would have literally swept her away. Again, it was a miracle. I think the biggest miracle was that Ryan came to me. He knew it was serious. He had that look on his face. Mom, we need to find her now. And he didn't know that I had already been getting that feeling that to do it. So when he walked in and said that, to me that was confirmation that the Spirit was trying to get us to do it, to go get her. And that's what woke me up, was the Spirit started telling other kids, your mom's not listening. We need to find Rebecca, and you need to do it now. Because it's, you know, the Spirit knew it was going to take us a while to find her anyway. Oh, that's a good lesson. When the Spirit says go, and you need to go do it now, I think he means now. So that was I'm glad that it didn't turn out a disaster, but wow, that's a good lesson to learn. Don't wait to follow the Spirit. You don't get those feelings all by yourself. Oh, you better go find Rebecca. It felt like it was someone else talking to me. You know, just that feeling, because you know your own thoughts and things that aren't things you usually think. I don't walk around going, oh, gotta go find Rebecca right now. You know, those are just things that come in because I feel like the Spirit speaks to you, not necessarily in like your own voice, but in ways that feels like this is coming from somewhere else. So Scott was my third child. I had Ryan, Robert, and then Scott. And so, you know, I felt like I knew about having babies. Well, his was so different from the very, very beginning. I knew I needed to find a doctor. Oh, I'm pregnant, I'm gonna need a doctor. So I called up a doctor, and then within a couple weeks, I just had this feeling that something was wrong. That wasn't right. I didn't have the right doctor. It was just like really strong. Something's not right. I don't have the right doctor. So I thought, okay, I cancel that. I call a different doctor to deliver my baby. And again, within a week to two, I just knew I didn't have the right doctor. And I kept thinking, wow, this is weird. You know, I've never experienced that before. And so I think the third time, I waited. I was like, okay, how am I going to feel after this appointment? And I didn't feel anything. So I thought, okay, it must be okay now, for whatever reason. But I always had this sense, you know, that it was different this time. Anyway, they had come out with this new sweetener that was in pop. Now, I'm not a pop drinker, but Kermit was, and he would always buy pop. And he had bought me this pop that had this new kind of sweetener. I can't remember what the sweetener was. But he was like, oh, I bought this for you. You know, do you want to drink it? And I remember popping it, and all of a sudden the Spirit said, don't drink it. And I knew, I said, I'm not supposed to drink this. And I felt like it was the sweetener. There was something in there that would harm my baby in the situation because I knew something was different with his pregnancy. And so I never drank it. I didn't drink. And in fact, it caused me to be more careful with what I ate and everything. But that was just clear. Don't drink that. And I knew not to drink it. So I kept thinking, something's up with this. It's either me or it's the baby. I'm not sure what, but something's definitely different here. So anyway, we went along, and I got the 9 months and everything. And to this day, I don't know why the doctor, I still don't know why. But anyway, I went into labor. No, I didn't go into labor. I wanted to go into labor. All my babies were born on days. Ryan was born the 24th. Robert was born on the 25th. And Scott, I wanted him born on the 26th because that would have been cool. So I was like trying to make this baby come. And actually, my labor did start about kind of late on the 26th. But when I got in there, it stopped. It just completely stopped. And I was like, no, it has to be born on the 26th. So I was walking the halls and everything. But I believe the timing wasn't right. He had to be born at a time that was right. The right people needed to be in place. So I had to wait till the 27th. So in the middle of the night, my labor starts again, and he's born in the morning. Well, everything went smooth. He came out, he looked gorgeous, everything was fine. So they take him to the nursery, and he starts to turn blue because inside his heart, because his arteries were in the wrong place and his heart closed, now instead of blood going through the heart and to the body and then back to the lungs and then back to the body, like a kind of a figure eight kind of thing, it was doing this. It wasn't mixing. And so his blood would come from the body and go back to the body, and from his lungs back to his lungs. And he wasn't getting any oxygen. And the doctor that was there, that was just come on, he knew exactly what to do. So he didn't have to go without oxygen very long. They gave him the stuff that would open up his heart again and make it one, because that's the way it is inside the mom. So now his blood is mixing with the oxygen because it's all one, opening. And the fact that he was there just in time to make the difference, I believe that's why I had to wait till the 27th. But anyway, it was just one miracle after another like that. And I just remember, there's times in your life where the Lord wants you to figure things out and to kind of have your own struggle to decide what what's your faith and that sort of thing. And other times, He just blesses you. Just for whatever reason, He says, I'm just going to bless you. And that was one of these. I was filled with such peace. I knew that the Lord was with me and that everything would be okay. Not that Scott was going to live, but I knew it was going to be okay. And I remember thinking, Heavenly Father, if you need to take him, I'm okay. If he gets to stay, I'm okay. I will accept whatever. Because the Spirit was so strong. I could feel it, just so strong that it was going to be what it needed to be. And it was God's hand was in this. So I've had other experiences where I wish it would have been like that, where I just knew, the Spirit was there. But I think He gives it to you sometimes, and He doesn't other times, because it's for your benefit and your learning. But I was running around telling everybody, comforting everybody in the hospital, just comforting everybody, because I felt such comfort. And the minister, we were in Iowa, and a minister came in to talk to me, and I was comforting him more than anything, because I just was so grateful to God that He had given me this peace to just accept His will, no matter what. Well, they sent the catheter in and ripped a hole in his heart so that his blood would mix with the oxygen. And he lived that way for 9 months, and then he had open heart surgery. And they were able to correct so that he, could live the rest of his life. But I just knew. I knew that it was God's will and that He had protected Scott that whole time. Had people in the right place, had me eating the right things, and had just protected it. And that was a great miracle to me. And then every time he'd have to have a surgery, the doctors always came out and said, we thought it would be this and that and cause it, but it was the smoothest thing we've ever had. And they kept saying that time and time again, that they were so always surprised. It went smoothly, no complications, over and over and over again. And I just know he was meant to stay as long as he's staying. I married Vern in 2011, and I met him at the temple, and we married in 2011, and so now it's been 11 going on 12 years. Anyway, we like to take trips. We go places. He's taken me to Israel and Machu Picchu and other wonderful places. So we were going on this tour, and we were in Guatemala at the time. We were visiting all these sites, the Mayan and the Aztec ruins and things, and it was a really wonderful trip. And then we were on our way home. And Guatemala was very COVID strict. This was 2-3 years after COVID. It was, but they were still leery. You had to have a COVID test before they let you in, and you had to have a COVID test before you could leave. I mean, they were like, we need to know if you have COVID. So nobody tested positive to COVID when we got there, but when we went to leave, there were 2 of us, me and this other fellow, that tested positive. Vern did not test positive to COVID. So now we can't fly back to the United States because the United States wouldn't let us in flying with COVID. Even though we had no symptoms, even though, you know, it had been, if for whatever reason there's false negatives too, especially in Guatemala, you're paying $50 a shot and it's probably only 50% accurate. And then we paid for the more expensive one that was 80% accurate for 100 and something, and I was still positive. But I had no symptoms. I could have had it, but I didn't have any symptoms. So anyway, we're stuck in Guatemala. The group we were with left, and I don't speak Spanish, and Guatemalans don't speak English. And I didn't know what to do. And my phone, I've never had a phone that worked outside the United States, and I always figure I'm with a group, everything's fine. I don't need a phone that works outside the United States. Well, you do. It's really wise to have one that works. Well, luckily, this other fellow, he was a medical doctor from Arizona, and he spoke Spanish. So we felt like, okay, we're safe. Well, they wouldn't let us, we went to the airport, and they're like, no, you can't fly. And they forced us out because you've got COVID, get out of here kind of thing. So we go back to the hotel, and he gets on, his phone works, and he has a computer. Everything works outside the United States for him. So luckily, he makes an air flight because he says if we fly into Mexico, Mexico doesn't care whether you have COVID or not. And if we walk across the border into the United States, then you can enter the United States because they won't check you. Only if you fly will they check you. So luckily, he got on there. He got a flight for himself to Mexico. He went to get a flight for us. They were gone. So now he's going to leave us, take his flight, and Vern and I get to manage our way out of Guatemala through Mexico, walking across the border. And I was like, no, his name was Dale. And I said, no, Dale, if you don't mind, we'll help you pay for that ticket. Can you make it for the next day? And that made us stay in the hotel longer. And he said, okay, I'll do that, So he eats the ticket, and this time he buys all three at the same time. Because he was like, if I do that again, it could happen again. So he buys all three tickets. And now we're going to have to escape Guatemala because they know we have COVID at the airport. And so we can't let them see us because they won't let us into the airport if they see us. So we have to hide ourselves so that the American side, that, the flights that go to America, or the United States, that they don't see us. And so we're like holding our bags this way and trying to make our way to the Mexican line that goes to Mexico. We get past the Americans and get to the line we needed to be in. We get up there to get our tickets, and they said, oh, we're so sorry. Yes, you can fly into Mexico City, but the flight to Tijuana has been canceled. You'll have to wait. So we said, well, we'll just get us to Mexico City. And it's really, it's getting later and later because we fly out, reach Mexico City, and it's, 2 o'clock. We don't even get the flight to go to Tijuana till, I think, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. So it's just getting later and later. But we get the ticket, and we're going to fly to Tijuana. And they have what they call a bridge, where the workers from Mexico cross over into the United States and then get on these buses and go to wherever they're going to work, hotels or, the farms or whatever. And so we're there. It's Sunday, and we're get to the bridge. We make it to Tijuana, and it's now midnight, 12:30. It's getting really late, and the line of the Mexican people who work in the United States is really long. I'm talking thousands. The line just goes on and on and on. And there's little children. I mean, it's 1 o'clock now in the morning, and the little 5-year-olds, and they're standing there next to their parents, and I thought, what? All night long they're just waiting to get to the other side so their parents can go to work. What a hard life. Anyway, we get in line, and it takes us a long time to get up there, but we finally make it. It's like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning now. We're in the middle of nowhere. When you cross the border, there's no bus waiting for us. There's nothing waiting. We're going to walk, I don't know how long. We're way outside of San Diego at this point. Of course, we're all praying. And we get through to the United States, finally get through the border, whatever. And we step outside, and there's this taxi sitting there. And Dale goes over and says, wow, what are you doing here so late? He said, oh, I just had a feeling to stay. 2 o'clock in the morning. He's willing to sit there and wait because he has a feeling to wait. That's a miracle. Well, and then Dale, we kept running into these problems, and Dale was speaking his Spanish and everybody understood him, and all these things were averted because Dale was there. I kept thinking we would have made it, Vern and I, but I think it would have been a lot more traumatic not being able to speak Spanish. And it was just a miracle. It was a miracle, and we got to visit with him. It took about a half an hour to drive into San Diego. So how long would that would have taken to walk if we had to walk? And I don't know how safe that is either. In the middle of the night, no lights. So I just feel like the Lord has blessed me over and over again. Miracle after miracle. So one other miracle I wanted to share just quickly, if I have a moment to do it. I drove truck a lot of years. For family and for just good neighbors and things. I would drive beet trucks and grain trucks and potato trucks. Anyway, those are long hours. If you've ever done it, it's really long hours. And I got really sleepy. I'd been doing grain, and then I did potatoes, and then I got into the sugar beets. And it had been a long 3 months. And I was really tired. And I was driving along, going Highway 39 here. I must have been going 55, 60, I don't know. You're just tooling along, I'm heading for Aberdeen. I didn't recognize that the truck in front, up there, that was up the road, was stopped completely right there in the road because he was going to be making a turn, and I don't remember a signal. But I know that I was falling asleep as I was driving. I could, doing this, and I thought, okay, I've got to do something. But I've got to stop first, right? Well, when I realized that he was stopped and waiting to turn, I couldn't stop. I put my feet on that brake and I pushed as hard as I could. And of course, when you're loaded with beets, you don't stop. I was just barreling. And it was an interesting experience in the sense that it was kind of like you say your life flashes, and it wasn't that it flashed, but different scenarios were running through my head. Do I want to pull around him? Because I won't know if there's somebody coming this way because it's a big truck. Do I go off into the ditch? What's the right thing to do? I know I'm going to hit him if I stay on this path. So my mind's doing that, and it felt like time slowed down. It just was so slow. This mind process was either that or my mind was doing this, and it just felt like it had slowed down. But it felt like it just suddenly was super slow. Well, the decision was made that I'm going to go ahead and hit him, and I think I was probably doing 40 or maybe 35 by the time I hit him, which is for a parked truck and another semi, both of them loaded with sugar beets. That's pretty fast. Anyway, as I came up to him and realized, the thought entered my mind, just relax. Just relax. Just relax. Don't try to hold it, don't try to protect yourself, just relax. So I relaxed. And then I felt arms holding me in my seat. I mentioned this to Mom, and she said, I bet it's your dad who held you in your seat. But I knew I was being held, that I had someone holding on to me. And sure enough, I hit the back. Well, his tailgate, the part that sticks out, the belt, it gets pushed way up inside. And the front end of my semi goes this way. So that gives a little give. And I don't even remember doing any more than just that. As fast as I was going, all I remember is a slight move forward. And to me, that was the greatest miracle. Yeah, that was a great miracle. And the thought that it was maybe my dad is sweet. The challenges. Well, when I was 11 years old, I went to school, and then the bishop came to pick me up I didn't know why the bishop, but it didn't feel strange. It was when I went to climb into the car, Doug, my younger brother, and Roger, my even younger brother, he'd picked them up first from school, and they were in the car. And I said, something's wrong here. This is not normal. And I was informed that my father had died in a car accident. He was in a pickup truck, and he was driving, and someone had a trailer behind them, and the trailer was not connected correctly. I think it was just wired onto the truck because he'd been having issues with the hitch, so he'd just wired it to just, I think, take it to wherever he needed. Well, it came off, and so as they passed, the trailer came and hit the side of my dad's truck, and he lost control. And as he lost control, his trailer then popped up and landed on the top of the cab, smashing him completely. And so it was a day that it changed me. Having him die just suddenly, because one day he's there and the next day he's not, is a real shock. And being an 11-year-old girl, you think you're going to have a lot of memories of your father at 11, and I do have memories of him, but not very many. And it's just funny how you don't have as many as you think you would at 11. But I came home and I found everybody here was crying, and it was hard for me. I wanted everything to be normal again. I was like almost desperate to make everything normal again. I just didn't want it to be real. So I went to my room and I stayed there, and it's almost like I refused to make any of it real. It's called denial, which is natural, but yeah, I remember announcing to everybody I was going to school the next day, simply because it had to be normal. I didn't want it to not be normal around and I couldn't take all the crying, and I didn't know what to do with it all. And so I went back to school, and of course the teachers and the friends are all shocked to see me. And that was awful because they're acting different towards me. And I thought, okay, now I really wish I hadn't come to school, because I went to have things be normal. Well, yeah, to suddenly not have your father, it affects you in ways that you don't expect. So the first thing that happened was, in our church we had, when you were turning 12, the 11 turning 12, they had what they called the daddy-daughter date. The dads would come to primary, and it was like a date. It was kind of a party. Well, that was supposed to happen a couple of weeks after my father died. So now, suddenly I don't have a dad to go to the thing. And now if I'd had years to prepare for it, they would have been different. But here suddenly, I have a change. And it happens, that's pretty quick. Well, they asked my grandfather to take me. And I love my grandfather, but it wasn't normal. I was the only one there with grandfather. And of course, everybody treats you different. Well, in the party, I was supposed to put on this little magic trick. Everybody was supposed to pick something, and I was going to do a magic show trick. And I demanded that I have it all normal. I do it. I'm going to do it. Well, of course, nothing's normal. And again, I wish I hadn't done it, because everybody treats you different. My reaction is different. It's my grandfather out there, So I spent most of my life in this denial. And I think I might have done it, well, it was a way of protecting myself. But I just kept, okay, we're just going to go on. Everything's normal. I realize it's not, but hey, it's just the way things are, kind of. Just a real denial. It wasn't until I was a mother of children, and I was at a friend's house, and years and years later, and she was showing me all these really nice things her dad had built for him, and they had this new house, and he came in and he fixed these cupboards, and and he built this cabinet, and and I went out of there and I just bawled. I got in the car and I just cried and I cried and I cried, because I don't have a dad. I was never going to get those things. And it was the first time I cried. I really cried. Now I went from that denial to admitting this is the way it is, and I need to feel all these feelings of loss, all those feelings. And it was hard. That was hard. But being an adult, I think, kind of helps. But it was so hurtful to have people tell me about their dads. I didn't want to hear it for a long time. So that was one of those challenges, even to this day. I mean, I can have a Father's Day and I can be happy, and I don't feel the loss so much anymore, and I'm not in denial anymore. But, to be sad and the challenges of not having the dad, I just find that fascinating that children can't process very well unless they're given maybe professional help to process it. But on their own, they don't. And that's what I've learned from this, is you have to either give them professional help or just let them grow up a little bit and then talk to them, because you can't process it very well. The way I saw my mom deal with it was kind of the way I was dealing with it. I don't know that it was denial, but she had to go on. So we just went on. It was like, this is the way life is, and we have to deal with it, so let's just move on. And we didn't talk a lot about Dad. There wasn't this mourning of his loss. It was, no, you just need to move forward. I'll have to ask her someday if it was a denial for her or if it was just, I need to move forward. I have a family to feed. I have responsibility. I have a lot on my shoulders. That would be my guess. And she had a baby. He was only a year old. He was the youngest. And she had a lot of responsibilities. There were 7 children. And so, yeah, it was hard. It was hard. It changed my life forever. I'm much more compassionate towards people. When people talk about either their dad was a bad dad or their dad, whatever, I'm much more compassionate because, you know what it feels like to go without. The other challenge was going through a divorce. Well, you go into a marriage with the rose-colored glasses, and, I felt like, that it was the right thing to do, or I wouldn't have married him. But it didn't take long to recognize that my personality versus his personality were not a good match. And I knew that pretty quickly. He tended to be a kind of self-serving, selfish kind of person. And I'm a pleaser. Well, you don't gain anything by being a pleaser because you're never happy. And so there was no making him happy, no matter how hard I tried, because he always wanted more. And he was pretty rough with the kids. He was verbally abusive, and so it was just hard. It was hard to take that. The kids seemed like they were getting it, and I was getting it, and we could never make the man happy. And he was kind of a loner. He wanted things his way, and he liked to be alone. And so that meant I had the children and I did things, and then he would come up and say, could you please keep them quiet? I need this, I need that, whatever. And so you're bending over backwards, and being a pleaser is a negative personality trait. It's really negative. It's a destructive. And so I was destroying myself trying to make everybody happy, the kids happy and the husband happy. And so I knew right away, actually, within a few months of our marriage, that I would either, that I was in trouble because of my pleasing personality, that this actually was a toxic situation for me. And I didn't really learn that until much later. I lived with him for about 15 years, and I finally started to learn that I didn't have to be such a pleaser, and I started to change my personality. And I remember him telling me one day, because I stopped pleasing. I was like, you'll just have to live with it. This is the way things are. And I started standing up for myself. And he didn't like that. He liked me giving him what he wanted, right? And so once I did that, then he got meaner. because he didn't like me giving being the pleaser. He wanted me to go back to that. And I remember telling him, I do that and I will die. I'm inside shriveling up. And if I go back to that person, I will die because I can't live that way anymore. I've learned to be more self-assertive. I've learned to just say no. I've learned to take control of my life, and I'm not going to go back there. And that was the moment he said, well, if you don't change, I can't live with you. And I said, well, I'm not changing, and I can't live with you. And he actually walked away. I was willing to walk away. I was wanting to walk away, but he was the one that walked away because he couldn't live with me anymore because I changed. Even with my change, I wasn't happy, though, because you're not in a loving relationship. Not to say he didn't love. Selfish people can love too. And I mean, it wasn't all bad. We had wonderful moments in our marriage. But no matter how hard you try it, it isn't going to work. And so divorce is there's lots of reasons for divorce. And divorce, I think, tears apart a family more than even death. I believe that children have to feel like their parents love each other. It gives them identity. It gives them strength. It gives them hope. And so you're actually doing a lot of damage to children, probably more than the adults. And that's one thing I didn't recognize. I thought the fighting and the hardship of being married was harder on them until after we were divorced, and then we were talking to them, and the divorce was actually harder because it's over. It's not a family anymore. Their identity's broken now. I don't know if that makes any sense. So for me to go through the divorce was very painful. But when I recognized what I had done to my children, then it hurt so much more than just what little it hurt me. Because it was hard. It's hard to go through a divorce. But they would, I didn't recognize it at first. Kathrine would tell me, she'd go to church or something and she'd come back and say, I don't have a dad. I'm like, yes, you do. You have a dad. I didn't recognize what she was trying to tell me. She didn't have a dad. Yeah, he's in the picture and she sees him occasionally, but she's not in a family, is what she was trying to say. I'm not like everybody else now. I'm different, and I don't have a dad. I made the mistake of telling one of the children that things were better. And they let me know, that isn't the case, Mom. It isn't better. And so it was a real eye-opener to realize the pain that it was causing my children. Now every time they do anything or go anywhere, it's kind of like me losing my father. Except I don't get to see him, but they've lost him and it's broken. And they want to kids want to fix it. They want it to be normal. They want to be a happy little family. And it's really hard. It's hard. I would watch my children struggle, whether it be getting the priesthood, whether it be just family outings. It didn't matter. The pain was always there, and you could see it. And I couldn't make it better, and that was hard. That was a challenge. They did do things with their dad occasionally. Got to go on trips. He liked trips, and so they would go on a trip occasionally. He moved away. He went to Iowa, and we stayed in Idaho, and so they didn't see him very much. But he wrote letters. He'd call them. But I think, I don't think it can be fixed until they grow up, and then they can process what's going on, and that it was Mom and Dad's decision. I'm going to be okay. That kind of thing. That kind of processing. The divorce felt better for me because the fighting stopped, the hurting stopped. I was free from other things, you know, it just was better for me. I felt much happier. In fact, Ryan said to me one day, "I've never seen you so happy." And it was because when you're caught in a toxic, you know, abusive, whatever, it just takes a toll on your soul. And I couldn't find any happiness. And then, so once I was free from that, it felt so freeing and so good. But then to find out, now I have these children whose hearts are breaking. You know, it's hard for them now. That became for me, a bigger challenge than the divorce, because we divorced amiably. We, you know, we still talked to each other. You know, we still did things together. It sounds weird, but we did. We took a few trips together because I wanted the kids to feel like it's not that bad. Watch, we can do this. You know, we went and had family pictures taken a couple of years later because they're his dad. And I wanted them to feel like we're a family. Even though we're not together in the same house, we're still a family. Yeah, trying to make it work for your kids, is that the right thing to do? And can I make it better? Because I don't know if I had stayed, if we could have worked it out, because we went to professionals, I think 3 or 4 different professionals trying to make it work. It wasn't a lack of trying, so that's why I felt like the divorce was the final thing I could do. On the other hand, once I realized what it did to the children, I think down deep in my heart, if I'd really known what was going to happen in the future, I would have just stayed with him. I would take the sadness and let my kids be happy. Kind of be, you know, the mom that sacrifices for her children. Because I didn't realize how hard it would be for them. On the other hand, I don't know, since Ryan said, I've never seen you so happy, it made them happy to see me happy. So I don't know if that's really the answer either. If you really ponder it, you make your choices and live with it and do the best you can. Because I don't know either choice was the best, but.
What made you decide, and how did you get into genealogy?
When I had my patriarchal blessing, it said that I would be doing family history and that I should learn it while I was young. So I took a few classes at Rick's College and I was hooked. I think, I mean, not only did the Lord know that I needed to do it, but I have a propensity to do it. I love the research. I love the discovery. I have people telling me, you should have been a detective, you know, because I love that whole process. So the Lord knew that already, but then it's more than that. You bless the lives of those who are living and the lives of those who have passed on. And so in the end, that's the greatest blessing, is that. And I've had many miracles and happenings that you know that the Spirit guides you and helps you, and just amazing things have happened.
It seems like maybe 10 or 15 years ago you really started getting into it.
Well, it was because I wanted to find out about my father. I was always fascinated with history. I love stories. But when it's your own family story, you know, and you have questions, that changes everything. So that really pushed me to get even more than just the occasional doing genealogy, and got me really deep, because I had my own questions I wanted answered. My father, though he had passed away, he had been adopted as a baby. And I wanted to know where he came from. I wanted to know who these people were, why he was adopted out, you know, the fact that his father came one time when he was a young man, 10, 11, 12, something like that. He came to make sure he was okay, he was happy. And Dad had told Mom that story, so, you know, luckily he talked to his wife, my mom, a lot about his desire to know. He wanted to know where he came from. Since he wasn't here and had passed away, I felt like I can do that. I can look. Won't help him any because he's not here, but we can know. Finding out more about my father and then doing the temple work for his family, his parents, his grandparents, his brothers and sisters, all of that, that suddenly became a real drive for me to understand, then to bless their lives. And I really believe, even though I don't have a specific incident or anything, but I feel like they were pushing me to do it. They wanted to be found too. You know, I found out that my dad died when he was 41 in 67. His father died 2 years later. So his father lived longer than my dad did. When I found out what year he had died and how close my dad was to finding him, but didn't really know where to go, because he looked in the county of Twin Falls where he was born, and his father lived in Jerome County, just across the border from Twin Falls. So when he went looking, he missed it because he was just off by, 10 miles. And so when I discovered that and realized that, I was doing something that my dad had wanted done, and then I was also blessing the lives of those who had passed on. Yeah, I was really motivated. Driven. I was driven. So while I'm doing genealogy, I've had lots of spiritual experiences. Many of them are they seem kind of subtle, but I would find somebody and just have a feeling of thank you come over me. Or I'm looking around and I'm not looking anywhere special, but I love to do the work, so I'm just on the computer, putting names in. One was named Freddie and the other was named Morgan. They were born probably 1900, 1905. We were related to them, probably third or fourth, fifth cousins maybe, once, 3 times removed, whatever. And they were baptized, all the temple work was done. And I said, oh, here's a bunch of sources. I'll just add that so it's more complete. Their story will be more complete. They were just put in. So I started finding their death places and their graves and their weddings. And suddenly I find a mistake. They were women. They weren't men at all. And so their temple work wasn't worth anything. It's as if it had never been done. And I felt the Spirit say to me, we had nobody else looking. We knew you would fix this. We knew you would make it right. No one else. Because they were like, oh, it's done. Let's move on. And I wasn't that kind of person. I always want to make sure that the story's correct or things are connected. And I knew these 2 ladies were like really looking to me to fix it because they knew I would. That's what I like to do, is make it right. And so I knew right away that they were pleading with me, fix this. It's not right. We can't be sealed to our husbands our children aren't going to be here because they've stuck us in as men just because our names were weird. So we fixed it. And Vernon and I went to the temple we didn't want to do the baptisms just because being older people, it's easier. And at Rexburg, there's a whole bunch of youth that just love to do baptisms. They're just looking to do them. So we walked into the temple and we found these 2 girls, college students, and we said, would you be willing to baptize for these sisters, these girls? They weren't sisters, but girls. And they said, sure, we'd love to. Well, when they came out to talk to us, they both were bawling. We couldn't believe how strong the Spirit was. These girls had been waiting, and I said, I know. They really were waiting because they thought it would never happen. So that was so powerful. That was one of the most powerful experiences. So when I first found them and discovered that they were women and that they actually had husbands and children, I did feel them, you feel their gratitude. I don't know how to explain it, but they're so grateful. Of course, these women were especially grateful because they didn't feel like they were ever going to be found because nobody was really looking that way. But I believe I was led to them specifically because I'll get on the computer and just start looking, okay, what can I fix? What can I add? Is there a baby missing? Because I love to find that missing baby that died young and nobody knew that they were there, because I start adding these sources. And when you add the sources, suddenly you find there was a baby and they're not in here. And again, the Spirit, this is so strong. It's like, thank you for finding my baby. We've been waiting for someone to look. Because a lot of people will say, oh, I see the temple work done, and they just skip it. And I'm always looking for that one that's been missed. So I felt an overwhelming gratitude towards me personally, saying, thank you, thank you. And I feel that quite often, a thank you, but this was more profound. Then I felt like their husbands and their children were involved in that thank you. So it was much more than the girls. And I felt that desperateness. There was a desperateness as we were not going to be found. We were stuck here like this. That kind of feeling. It was stronger than most because of that. They felt like all hope was gone. They probably saw people pass them by going, oh, that work is done. And it could have been their own, second cousin or whatever that was just passing them by. Oh, well, you'd think they'd know that they were boys. But I just got that feeling of desperate hopelessness and then moved to absolute hope. And then the fact that we weren't going to wait. Vern and I don't wait to do the temple work. We're always like, we got to go today. We got to, these guys have been waiting long enough. So, yeah, it was a very powerful feeling. There's times when you don't feel very much when you're doing it, and other times it's super powerful. Another time that was super powerful, if it's okay to mention this one. I was looking for families, missing people, and I had discovered these soldiers. They had died in war. I don't remember if it was World War I or II, but they had died in war. They were just young. They had never had a chance to marry. They never had a family, so there was no descendants looking for them. And as I put them in, I just felt, again, an overwhelming gratitude. And I heard, you don't hear a voice, you feel a voice. And it said, I gave my life. I didn't have a chance to live and have a family. I gave my life for my country. Thank you for helping me, because I had no one else to help me. Again, it was that same feeling of overpowering. I had no one else looking for me. And whenever I find a soldier, especially if they died young, I always weep. Maybe because I feel their spirits thanking me, or just that feeling of they didn't have a chance, The rest of us got to live on and they didn't. And especially where you don't have descendants, because family work has to do with your descendants finding you. And if you don't have that, somebody's got to find you. And I love having that opportunity to do that. That brings me such joy. So those are finding those missing babies and the soldiers and then those two women have been some of the most powerful I've ever had. I had another one, where it was an entire family. I started discovering that none of them had been done. I can't remember if I started with the great-grandparents or which direction I was going, from the children to the grand. I think it was the great-grandparents, and I kept going down. And it was the same story. We'd have people who married, didn't have children, some that didn't marry, but this whole family, and then their children, and it dwindled to like one person. Instead of growing, their family thing growing, it kept going smaller, because either they didn't have children or their babies all died, and I was putting this family together. And I suddenly realized they were all standing there in my living room, because they didn't have a descendancy to find them again. It was the same basic idea. There was nobody there looking. And I knew they were standing there in my living room. And they were all so grateful that somebody had put that family together. It was just overwhelmingly, that I didn't feel so much in a gratitude sense, but I knew they were standing there. All of them. I said, Vern, my living room is full. All these people are here, from the great-great-grandparents down to the last generation that just died off because they didn't get married, that last great-great-grandson or whatever it was. And again, it was just an overwhelming, wow, nobody was looking for us, thank you, feeling. They're there because you feel them. it's like having that sense that somebody's behind you and you look, nobody's there, but you know somebody's there. I mean, you can't deny that feeling. You know they're there. It feels like you have all these people and you feel their presence. I don't know how else to say it, because there's times when it happens to all of us. You know, there's that feeling and you turn around, oh, hi, I knew somebody was standing behind me. You know, and there is somebody there. It's that same feeling. You just know they're there. You have that feeling of the gratitude. And it's not that you hear it, you feel it. It actually enters your soul, like you hear it in your heart. So I was busy doing all this wonderful work for these people who I actually didn't know. I'm related, but I don't know them. And I'm working along, and I hear my sister Carolyn say, she passed away in 2005, correct? About then? 2006. It was around there. So I'm doing all this temple work, and I heard her say to me, and I knew it was Carolyn, what about me? You forgot about me. And I thought, well, no, you were baptized and Mom did your endowment. What do you mean, what about you? So I decided to open her page up and take a peek. She hadn't been sealed to Manuel. She wasn't sealed. She was sealed as a child to the parents, but she wasn't sealed to Manuel. And I realized she didn't want to sit there and not have all her work done. I was missing that one piece. And so I contacted Sarah, and she said, oh, please, yes. But we had to do Manuel's, all his work, because nothing had been done. And he'd passed away a year later, wasn't it? After Carolyn. So I contacted Doug, and I said, Doug, would you be willing to do Manuel? And he said, of course. So he did all of it, even the sealing. And he told me it was very, very strong. Manuel was excited to get his work done, and Carolyn was excited to be sealed. Because we can't, all of it needs to be done. We can't leave little pieces undone. And so Carolyn, I knew it was Carolyn, and she was there asking me not to forget her.
Permission to do.
Sarah gave me permission to do Manuel. Yes. I've always just considered this partly just something I love to do. And I realize they're appreciative. I really do. I can only imagine how grateful, especially those that didn't think they were ever going to be found. But I went in one time and just asked my bishop, to give me a blessing. I was dealing with some stuff during my calling, and I just said, I just would love to have a blessing. And he's a very spiritual man, a really good bishop. And he said to me, okay, that's great. I'll give you a blessing. So, of course, we had a prayer together, and then when he laid his hands on his head, he said, I invite any of those on the other side of the veil that wants to come, I invite them to come. And then he gasped. And he gave me a beautiful blessing. And afterwards he said, I had no idea how many people on the other side love you. People you know and the people you don't know. People you've helped. And that changed everything for me. I now, when I do the temple work, even if I don't know them, or I don't have a spiritual experience about them, they're so grateful that I've done this, that they couldn't do themselves. There was nobody else was doing it, and you know what I'm saying? They have to wait till we do it for them, because they can't do it here. I mean, now that they've passed on. And yet they have to be baptized. That's one of the commandments. You have to be baptized. And so the Lord's made a way for me, and anyone else who wants to do it can bless their lives. But it made me realize just how much of a blessing it really is. Just how important it is. It's true that we are saviors on Mount Zion. When they said that, they mean it literally. And we've been told that the people on the other side that we help, they want to turn around and help you back. So they become, I don't know, I'm going to call them guardian angels, but they help support your children. They protect, they watch over. They care about you because you cared about them, if that makes sense. So when he gasped and then told me he didn't have any idea there'd be that many people that would come, I knew they were people that I had helped and that were so grateful they wanted to be part of that blessing.
So when he said, I invite anybody on the other side of the veil, was that, why do you think he did that? Was that just a prompting? Or
that's a really good question. Why did the bishop include that? His name was Bishop Robert Johnston. Yeah. He's a very spiritual man anyway. And it's true, I've never had them say that before. But partly because I think I was telling him about some of the struggles I was having, just confidence level and my calling, and I'm really discouraged. And I think that was part of it. He was inviting my family members from the other side of the veil to join, to help it buoy me up, make me feel like this is something you can do and you'll have help, they'll help you. I mean, that kind of thing. That's why I think he said it. But he may have just been inspired to do that so that I would have that experience to know that what I'm doing is really important, that it's absolutely changing lives. Well, you can't not find that missing baby and not hear the mother say thank you, and not know that it's important. But somehow I hadn't grasped even those that I did that didn't have a missing baby or wasn't a soldier that died young. They all cared. I think that's what changed me, is that they all cared. And I don't know how many came. It was just, I didn't feel it, but the bishop gasped because he was shocked at how the room filled up. The spirit of Elijah is that promise that we made to each other. We made a promise before we even came to this earth that we would help each other make it back. Fathers and children are going to take care of each other and make sure everybody's temple work gets done. And it's a promise that we make. So how the Savior fits into this is he made it possible for everyone, but the part that we need to do is make it so that their ordinances are done. I love the fact that the plan is all perfect. It's all laid out perfectly. There's not a missing part or a missing person. It's such a wonderful blessing though, if you think about it. We become, being able to help each other, helps us become more like him. That kindness and the mercy and everything. I mean, we don't actually save them, it's the Savior who saves them. But we fulfill the law that is required. We help them do that. And so my gratitude is the Savior, because it's all wasted if he didn't do the atonement, his atonement. But to think that if we didn't fulfill these laws, that all would be wasted on our part too, both have to happen. It suddenly becomes a terribly important thing, doesn't it? I didn't mention much about my mother. Her name is Enid Robertson Williams. And I had the dearest, sweetest mom ever. She filled my life with the beautiful music. She was talented musically. I remember being so proud of her. She would sing like in church. And this beautiful voice would sing out praises to God. And I knew she knew it was true. And then the music was so beautiful. I would go to bed hearing music playing, her singing, or her on the piano. It was the most wonderful childhood. And then I'd wake up to music. And I loved the music that we had in our home. But more than that, I knew she taught me the gospel. I knew she loved the Lord. She was a wonderful cook. She made the most delicious meals. She always grew a garden, so we had fresh vegetables. And I remember I had somebody comment to me one time about the meals they had as growing up, and I said, well, we ate whatever was in the garden. But I said, my mother always made it taste amazing. It was always really good. I love her cooking. My mom, she taught, I remember the first thing that I had a testimony of was tithing. And it was because she had a testimony of tithing. And she made it important to all of us to be honest and to pay it and to honor the Lord by keeping His commandment to pay tithing. And I never doubted it when my mother said it was true, because I knew she knew. So I was blessed with a wonderful mother. And we used to go to Education Week together and talk spiritual stuff, and we still do talk spiritual stuff, but I mean, it was fun. We went to concerts together. My mother taught me how to love music and how to appreciate music. And I remember going to concerts or something at the high school and kids are talking while people are performing, and I would think, you're not supposed to be doing that. My mother taught us not to talk while other people are performing. That's rude. And so, I had a sense of what was right and wrong. I have to tell you another funny one, actually. We did not enter the chapel unless we were appropriately dressed. That was the rule. And I remember the first time we were supposed to meet at the church, and everybody was in their slacks, and they walked in, and I was supposed to join them in the chapel. I wouldn't do it. I was like, my mother told me, you don't go in the chapel dressed like this. And they're like, yes, but this is where we're meeting. And I'm like, I can't do it. My mother said no. And here I am, a 40-year-old. But those things matter. What you teach your children matters. And I remember the first time I called her friend by her first name. And she let me know that was inappropriate. She's sister so-and-so. You're younger, you do not call the elder people, you respect them. And I appreciate my mother's teachings. I feel like it made me a better person. I would want my children to know that I love them unconditionally, that I'm proud of them, each and every one. They're all different, but they have amazing talents, intelligence, creativity. I am so proud of my children. I want them to know that I know the gospel is true. I know the kingdom of God is here. I know that the priesthood is a real power. Prayer is a real power. Faith is a power. I know it's all true. I've had moments where I doubted, where I struggled, but I can never deny that I've had those witnesses in my heart and my soul, that my Heavenly Father loves me, they love Him, He loves them. I worded that strange. And I know we're going to be together in the next life, that we really are a family. I just love them so much. That's what I want them to know.